ever.
Okay. So yeah, we can probably begin admitting people from the waiting room.
Great.
So we're just going to be waiting a few moments while we admit people from the waiting room. So yes, just give us a few minutes. Okay, it looks like most people are in from what I know, so we're just going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Sex Ed Initiative info session. So before we get started, we're just going to give a really quick introduction on who we are and our organization. I'm Irene. I use she, her pronouns. I go to the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy, and I am the founder of the Sex Ed Initiative.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I also use she, her pronouns. I also go to IPSA with Irene, and I'm the charter head.
Hi, I'm Ami. I also use she, her pronouns. I go to Bartlett High School, and I'm the head of social media and marketing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine, and I also use she, her pronouns. I am a junior at Glenbrook North High School, and I am the newsletter and communications head.
So yeah, a little bit about our organization. We were founded last winter after realizing a lot of schools in the Chicagoland area were not providing adequate sex ed. So our goals include aiming to provide inclusive and comprehensive sex ed in all high schools, and destigmatizing the sex ed content. We also want to keep schools accountable to abide by their state law. For instance, Illinois has a bill called SB 818 that has guidelines for their curriculum. So keeping schools accountable for actually adhering to those standards. We also offer condensed sex ed for those who have no access on our social media and on our website. We also have chartering processes where schools can can apply for a charter and they can reform their curriculum personally.
Okay, so before we introduce our guest speaker, we're going to do a little pop quiz. So we're going to give you a couple questions, and you can write true or false in the chat to see how much you know on sex ed. Okay, so first, true or false? All U.S. high schools require sex ed to be taught.
Okay, we're getting some responses in the chat. Okay, seems like most people are thinking false. And that is the correct answer.
So our second question is, all Illinois high schools teach the same sex ed curriculum?
Yeah, so most people are saying false. And that is the correct answer.
And our last question is, what grades require some level of sex ed instruction in the US?
Yeah, so this is a confusing question. Varies by state and school, high school, 5th through 7th. Varies by states. Junior high. Yeah. So that was a trick question. There aren't really any grades that require sex ed instruction. So now we can finally introduce our guest speaker. Our speaker for today is Dr. Erin Castelloe. She is a comprehensive sexual health educator and family doctor in San Diego. She's passionate about social justice and empowerment through education. So now turning the floor over to Dr. Castelloe, what was the incentive for you getting interested in sexual health education, and what was your journey through it?
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin, and that's a great question. So really, I mean, it was an iterative process, me getting to becoming a comprehensive sexuality educator. But it started when I was young, and my parents taught me pretty much nothing about sex ed, and I had to self-teach. I shared with the people on this call, the organizers of this call, of the Sex Ed Initiative, that when I was learning about sex ed, it was before the internet. And in my little town, all of the sex ed books were kept in a locked glass case in our library. So I had to go to the head librarian, who kept the key for the locked glass case on a chain around her neck, and get her to unlock the case. So I taught myself. And when I was practicing medicine, I never had a single male patient come to me and tell me that they couldn't find their penis, but I had a lot of female patients come to me and tell me that they were pretty sure that they didn't have a clitoris. And some of these people were in their 50s, some of them older. And I tell you that I could find a phallus on every single person who came to me convinced that they didn't have one. And I thought that was a really sad state of affairs, that there were people who had never been able to locate all of their sexual body parts. And if you can't locate your body parts and you can't name them, then you're kind of at a disadvantage as far as taking care of your own health and body. And that kind of got me fired up. And then when I became a parent myself and recognized that the schools were probably not going to teach my kids anything more about the fact that puberty would happen, and that if they had, they were going to teach the quote unquote girls that they were going to have periods. And I say quote unquote girls because never, outside of medical circles and in sex ed, do you, well, I'll say not never, but very rarely do you even hear about the fact that intersex people exist. And they certainly didn't talk about it in any sex ed that I ever had. And it's not even common among physicians for them to talk about people being intersex. It's just not something that's very common. So there were several different issues. So long-winded answer, like my own personal experience with lack of sex ed, because my parents were too ashamed or embarrassed to tell me anything, or perhaps they didn't have any education themselves. And so they sort of didn't even know where to start. And then being a practicing physician and recognizing that a lot of my patients were coming to me and not able to, care for their own sexual health, which is one component of whole person health is sexual health. And then having children myself and recognizing, oh, I'm going to have to take this into my own hands, because I don't think that even in a state that does have pretty strong laws around, like Illinois, California has legislation. Ours is called AB 329. And we do have legislation around what needs to be taught in schools, but the extent to which it has been enforced is not clear to me. Does that, hopefully I fully answered your question, Irene.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
And I should have said right off the top, I am cisgender. I use she, her pronouns. So.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And our first question is, what is the state of sex ed in California and San Diego? And for instance, how many schools have a mandate, or what is the basic curriculum like?
Right. So in the state of California, as I said, we do have legislation that requires fact-based sex ed, and that is not the case in the vast majority. I think last count, I mean, with Illinois coming into line, we maybe have 14, maybe 15 states out of 50 that require, sex ed to be scientifically based and evidence-based. The vast majority of states in the United States. And I'd have to look at this again. There are a couple of different organizations that keep track of this. Does anybody at the Sex Ed Initiative, do you know what the current count is? Because until Illinois came in line, I thought we only had 13, but it's possible that another state or two, in addition to Illinois, has come on board. So that's why I said 14 or 15. So the state of sex ed in California is probably pretty good compared to many other states, in the sense that we do have sexuality education that is not supposed to be heteronormative. We are supposed to provide information about people of all genders and all sexualities. And we are supposed to provide solid education on how to have safer sex. I always say safer sex rather than safe sex, just simply because, there is always some risk in any behavior, right? So, and even, well, I won't go off on a tangent, but that is, and what I mean by that is that it is not abstinence-based sexuality education, which basically says don't do it. It's about when you decide to become sexually, when you decide to become sexual and you're going to have partnered sex rather than solo sex, what does that involve, right? And what are your risks with regard to, sexually transmitted infections and so forth? So again, we do have mandated education that the education is evidence-based. It is not supposed to be heteronormative. It is supposed to contain information about safer sex and prevention of sexually transmitted infections. It's supposed to have components about healthy relationships. So really, and in other parts of the world, they don't talk about comprehensive sexuality education. They talk about relationships and sexuality education. So in comprehensive sexuality education, which is the term that we typically use in the state of California and in other states in the US that follow ASECT guidelines, that's typically what is used as comprehensive sexuality education. Healthy relationships is one component of that. I think I hit all the major points that need to be covered in comprehensive sex ed in the state of California. Now, the piece that I don't really understand, and I did some looking once I knew that this was going to be a question for today's talk, I don't know how often state officials, and this could be because of COVID, but it may have other elements to it as well. I'm not sure how often state officials are actually auditing schools to find out whether, not just what curriculum have they adopted, because I can show you that, let's see, I'm just going to show, this is my one of my teaching tools is, this is Positive Prevention Plus, which is a curriculum in which I'm trained, that is used by a lot of schools in the state of California, and it's used because it hits all of the criteria for AB 329. The problem is I've heard feedback, and again, from reliable parent sources who have children who attend schools where Positive Prevention Plus is being taught. It seems to me that schools pick and choose what lessons they teach out of Positive Prevention Plus. If they're picking and choosing what lessons that they're teaching out of the curriculum, that means that the entire curriculum is not being taught, and therefore there are gaps. So I think we have room for improvement, even in what some see as a pretty progressive state like California. And San Diego has, probably the same problems as they do in other parts of the state, is that, rolling out of these initiatives can be very challenging, especially if you're in a school district that has, well, there are challenges above and beyond budgetary, but when these curriculum requirements roll out, oftentimes, school districts with more resources will purchase something like Positive Prevention Plus. Again, we've talked about the fact that they can pick and choose what lessons they teach, which means it's going to be incomplete. But I think that based on the resources in the neighborhood schools, they may not even be able to purchase a curriculum that is going to be comprehensive. I'll pause there to see if there's any questions about that.
I guess there are no questions, so we can move on.
Okay. What aspects of sex ed do I hope to? All of them, actually. And the reason I say that is, well, first and foremost, I think what I'd like to see happen is I would like to see more teachers who are teaching sex ed be there by choice. And I'm not sure if that is a pie in the sky sort of a fantasy that I have that is simply not realistic. Because I know that a lot of people are really uncomfortable talking about sex at all. I mean, most people can't say the word penis. They can't say the word clitoris. They can't say the word scrotum. So when they're faced with having to dive into a curriculum that covers not just anatomy and physiology, but covers relationships and consent and, condoms and things that they are simply uncomfortable or woefully ill prepared for some other reason to talk about, it makes it hard for the people who are trying to learn to really get what they need out of that curriculum. So tangibly, I would like to see, if possible, people who are well prepared and want to teach sex ed, teaching sex ed. I work on that from a really grassroots place. I said to the people from the Sex Ed Initiative, I lose money teaching sex ed because I buy so many resources to share with parents in the classes that I teach for them. I teach through an adult school here in San Diego in just my little neighborhood. It's called the Poway Adult School. And I teach parents how to talk to their kids about sex. I've broken it down into, just a couple of 90-minute classes just to get them started. For some parents, they really just want to know how to navigate puberty, and everything else is off the table because they're just simply too uncomfortable. But I found a lot of parents, if they'll attend my puberty classes, where I kind of teach them how to prepare for puberty positively with their kids, that they will sometimes then come on and take one of my classes on nurturing sexual intelligence in our children. So I would like to see, not only school-based sex ed curriculum improve in the sense that the teachers who are teaching it, I'd like them to be comfortable. And I would like some of the things that we already hit on. I'd like there to be, I'd like to see, for example, AB 329 is a nice piece of legislation. I'd like to see it actually operationalized in all schools across the state. I think that would be a good first step to see if we can get that to happen. I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, so our next question for you, do you feel as though sex ed is stigmatized, and is that reflected in like our behaviors or attitudes?
Actually, before we start with this, we had a
I was just
question in
gonna
the
ask.
chat.
Yeah.
So someone said, do you have concerns that in the current political atmosphere with efforts at book banning and other forms of idea control, that there will be even greater pushback on sex ed curriculum?
Yes, I do. And I read everything that gets put up on, gets suggested as a banned book. Downstairs, I have The Complete Mouse. I don't know if anybody else is reading The Complete Mouse right now, but they are in a number of different places across the country. They're recommending that this book be banned. And one of the other ones that is way high on the list always. I'm just going to talk a little bit about banned books for a while because I love books and I am passionate about books. And those are fighting words when we start banning books. We live in a country with free speech for a reason. George is one of the most precious books I've ever read about a transgender girl. And if you haven't read it, pick it up. It's lovely. But again, it's at the top of the ban, at least, and maybe Mouse, bumped it out. I don't know. But drama by I was looking to see if I had it, by Raina Telgemeier is also a fantastic graphic novel for young people, especially if you're gay and trying to figure out how to come out. I mean, it's lovely to see books like that. That one is on the banned book list. So yeah, I do. And the current political atmosphere worries me for a lot of different reasons. Largely, well, how to even quantify all the things that bother me about it? But I think that people have stopped having respectful conversations in a lot of different formats, not just on social media, but I'm witnessing a lot of really disrespectful communications between people. And I think that we have to find ways to have productive dialogue in order to, for not only for good sex ed to happen, but for us to move forward as communities and as counties and as states and as a country. I think we have to, I know that's an incomplete answer to the question that was in the chat, but yeah, I have a lot of concerns about that because we won't ever, not only will we not overcome some of the stigma around sexuality education, but we'll have some other huge hurdles as communities, both smaller and larger communities. Any follow-up questions about that? Again, that's just me, my personal opinion, that I do have a lot of concerns about this, but it's one of the reasons that I read everything that gets suggested as a book, because the American Library Association keeps track of what books across the nation, they have requests to have banned out of libraries. So should we move on to the next question, or is there anything else in the chat that I should address? Because I have to admit, I didn't see anything else come through, but I might have missed it.
I can't see anything else. So if you want to answer this next question.
Yes, and I definitely think sex ed is stigmatized. What's kind of interesting is that, we live in a society where, sexual images and verbiage is everywhere. It's everywhere. I mean, when my son was learning, this is just a funny example, is that when my son was learning to read, we were at the grocery store and he was trying to sound out the word orgasm on the front of a Vogue or a Cosmo or something like that. And he was trying really hard to sound it out. And of course, a lot of kids, when they're trying to read the word orgasm, will say organism because they've heard the word organism before, but often they haven't heard the word orgasm. And it's a story that I tell a lot of my parents because he got it and he asked very loudly what an orgasm was because he had read it off of the cover of this magazine. And I turned to him and I said, that is a fantastic question. And orgasms are awesome. But there are a lot of people in this line who have don't even know what the word means. So we're going to talk about it when we get to the car. And then I did talk to him about an orgasm, what an orgasm was when we got to the car. And that's one of the examples that, number one, it's funny, right? Number two, it's potentially embarrassing, right? Because if your child is pretty young and is yelling about what's an orgasm in the line at the grocery store, you're getting a lot of funny looks. But also it's a good opportunity as a parent to say, hey, this is a teachable moment, and I can take a deep breath and I can figure out how to teach a 6-year-old what an orgasm is, right? Because I can find the age appropriate language to teach him, and then I can build on that from time to time to time. So to get back to the question, which is, do I feel that sex ed is stigmatized? Yes, because there is, this language and images about sexuality everywhere, but yet sex ed, right, is not only stigmatized, but contentious, right? That we feel like, even though there are these, we're immersed in this sexual soup, that, to actually teach, individuals, these are all of your body parts, to go beyond head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and to say, okay, every human being who is born has a phallus, right? And some of those people have a phallus that's called a clitoris, and some people have one that's called a penis, and some people have one that is somewhere in between, right? There are more than 50 medical terms for what the external genitalia can look like at birth. I don't think the vast majority of people know that. I don't think it's something that we talk about. I have yet to get a birth announcement that says our baby is intersex, right? You get a birth announcement, it says it's a boy, it's a girl. I've never even gotten a birth announcement said, guess what? We had a human, right? There are a whole bunch of parents out there that are looking into different ways of raising their kids in more gender neutral fashion, calling them babies. You can read about all these different groups that are doing these things, and everybody has opinions about this, but there's a lot of stigma from not only stigma around gender and gender identity, but a lot of stigma around the words. A lot of stigma. Can somebody read this to me, this full question that came through in the chat?
Yeah, I can read it for you.
Thank you.
So one of our viewers said, a lot of stigmas, especially those towards sex ed, in my personal experience, have come from cultural traditions and basically how it went down from my mom and those types of things. For these cultural trends that come from all around the world and are passed down from generation to generation, do you have any comments or suggestions towards how to navigate these differences, especially in a place like the US?
Oh, that's such a great question. And it's really, let's see, I'm trying to think if I can grab the cover. I don't know if any of you saw the cover of National Geographic. Sorry, I have so many books. I'm going to see if I can pull it. For the gender revolution, did anybody see the National Geographic gender revolution cover? There were 2 different covers that came out, one for the newsstands and one for the subscribers. And then Katie Couric did a special called The Gender Revolution. It's lovely. I highly recommend both the issue and then all of the extra materials that are free on the National Geographic website. But I mention this in the context of cultural stigmas. In some cultures, they actually have at least 3 genders, which is very different from most of what is presented in mainstream media, shall we say, and in most mainstream, I'll say, and that may be, people may have issue with me saying that, but the vast majority of the time, I don't hear people talking openly about their culture accepting multiple different expressions of gender. It usually is, I have parents coming to me saying, my child is gender non-binary. I don't know how to handle this. I don't know. I'm not comfortable calling them they, so I get more angst around this than acceptance. But there are various cultures around the world that actually celebrate individuals who and consider them holy or spiritually unique and special in the cultural tradition because they embody both the masculine and the feminine. But that doesn't answer the question, right? So just an aside, check out Gender Revolution and all of that on the National Geographic website. If you haven't had an opportunity to do so, there's a lot of great stuff to unpack there. But if you are from a cultural tradition, I am from a cultural tradition where there was a lot of not only stigma around sexuality, but a lot of, and mine was a very strict religious upbringing, whereby, you know, sex is dirty and nasty, and you shouldn't do it until you get married. And then it's this beautiful gift from God. And try unpacking those messages, right? Like, and those are my messages. That's my job to unpack those messages. But there were these very mixed messages that I got. And I had a recurring nightmare when I was growing up that, that an angel had come to me and told me that I was pregnant, just like Mary in the Bible. And that I went to my parents and I told them that it was the Immaculate Conception, and they kicked me out of the house. And this was my recurring nightmare. And it's funny, except that this was my recurring nightmare. So it wasn't funny to me when I was coming of age during adolescence, because I was pretty darn sure that my parents would not believe, as religious as they were, that there was a second Immaculate Conception and that it was me. Nope, they just kicked me out of the house. So how do you navigate cultural differences, especially if you come from a tradition that has very specific values around sexuality? And my advice for you, take it or leave it, will be the same that I give to adults when I teach this, is that baggage around sexuality can only be unpacked one piece at a time. So I would just encourage you to have conversations about each of these communications, traditions, values. And if we can maintain open dialogue, which goes back to my concerns around, our current political climate, is that dialogue is essentially, civil, productive dialogue is, but especially between different factions, not just religious and political, but other factions, seems to be less, and not zero, but less. So just like that, with strong cultural traditions and values related to sexuality based in those cultural traditions, I would just say unpack that sexual baggage one piece at a time. I hope I answered that question that was in the chat. And then I don't know if you want to spend more time talking about the stigma around sexuality education, but yes, definitely stigmatized. And I think it's because generation upon generation has had difficulty talking about sexuality in an open and honest way. And so it just continues generation after generation.
Then I guess to build off that point, what do you believe are the root causes for this stigma?
Yeah. So fear is number one. And then what I was just talking about, this use this analogy of baggage around sexuality, also can drive stigmatization. And fear, every single time I teach a class on sexuality, I get questions that talk about people's fears. They fear that if they talk about sexuality, their kids are going to go out and have sex. They fear that if they talk about porn and the fact that porn is not sex ed, that their kids are going to go look up porn. They have fears that if they talk about gender diversity, that their kids will get confused and not know what gender they are. They fear that if they talk about bisexuality, just as an example, that their kids will become bisexual. So there's this fear, right? So I think that fear drives a lot of these stigma. And then other sources of sexuality based baggage come from some of the cultural values, some of the religious values. We can kind of take some of those things apart, based on various traditions if you like to. Here's one. So, for example, I recently was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is a United Methodist minister. And at the time that we were talking about some of the language around same-sex relationships in the Bible. And one of the reasons that there is such strong language about this in the Bible, just to look at one faith tradition, is because at the time that the Bible was written, they believed that the males carried basically, miniature babies inside a seed, and that they planted those miniature babies inside the womb of a fertile woman. And so that if they spilled their seed on the ground or had a same-sex relationship, and they again spilled their seed somewhere other than in a fertile womb, that they were basically killing all of these potential lives. Again, so this source of stigmatization and problematic sharing of information, or problematic sharing of information, is based on lack of understanding of what actually was required to grow another human being. That's just one example. There are many, many root causes, but if I had to choose one, I would say fear.
So, in a similar vein, what do you believe discourages most people from changing their local programs?
That is a great question. We talked a little bit about this at the beginning, I think before the rest of the group joined, but for local programs to change, even if there's a state mandate, the funds and the personnel have to be available. So schools are, at least in California, notoriously struggling with funding. Public schools are struggling with funding. For those schools that are very well resourced because they are privately funded, they have endowments, or they have very, very well-to-do families supporting them, then there are different reasons. And we can go into those a little bit if you would like. But I think that for public schools, I think it's resourcing. I think it's the funds to purchase the new curricula, the funds to get the personnel trained, personnel who are willing and able to actually do the teaching once they have been trained. So I think that there's some practical issues at play there. And then we can go back to the previous slide and talk about stigmatization and strong cultural and or religious values that believe that one of the things that I hear very commonly is that groups saying that sex ed should happen in the home. From what I'm hearing from parents and students, is that sex ed is not happening in the home because of the same stigma that we are immersed in every day when we come to talking about sex ed. But I think it goes back to fear, so that if you're getting parent groups or religious groups or cultural groups or political groups that are pushing back against sex ed, what they're concerned about is they're concerned that the sexuality education is going to somehow conflict with their personal values, and that they won't know how to handle the fact that the children in their home will then have a source of information that differs from their personal or community values. And again, it comes right back to having dialogue around and about topics that are maybe not rooted in your personal value system. Yes, know what your value system is. And this is one of the things that I tell parents is, I'm not here to tell you what your sexual values are. I'm not here to tell you what you should or should not say to your kids. I'm not here to tell you what words to use. What I'm here to tell you is that there are some really good things that can happen if you teach your child all the names for all of his or her body parts and how to care for themselves in tangible ways, and how to have healthy relationships, and how to tell a sexual partner, if they choose to have partnered sex, what they like and what they don't. It's the same thing as, do you like to be hugged or do you not like to be hugged? Would you rather have a fist bump or would you rather have a hug? Just those very basic types of human touch. What do you like? Sorry, I have a tendency to go off on tangents, but what do I believe discourages most people from changing their local programs? Resourcing, both financial and personnel, and then pushback from groups that fear what may be taught if their local programs do change. Keeping in mind that most local programs don't teach much in the majority of states across the country. And even in those states like ours, in which there are mandates about what is taught, it's inconsistent and incomplete, in my opinion. How can we make sex ed topics more approachable? Tiny Talks. This is the platform on which I stand, and I'll explain to you a little bit about why I say that. You've probably all heard about the proverbial talk. Parents are taught that they are supposed to have one comprehensive talk about sex ed with their kids, and then that's it. Done and dusted. They have nothing more to do. They've done the talk and that's it. And phew, their job is done. I believe that we can make sex ed topics more approachable by having tiny talks throughout life. Beginning, if you're a parent and you're going to look at this as a journey that you're going to take with your child, that we begin in infancy. I guarantee you that if you're going to have to teach your child, that they have a clitoris and a vulva and a vaginal opening, and inside they have a vagina and a uterus, uterine tubes and ovaries. If you start using some of these words during infancy, while you're changing diapers, that you're going to be a lot more comfortable using those words by the time you get to puberty and beyond. So I firmly believe that if we can break, quote unquote, the talk down into tiny talks that we insert into everyday conversations, that it will make sex ed topics more approachable, and it will improve sex ed over time as we all get more comfortable.
So our final question is, what advice would you give to others trying to become more informed on this topic and to transform their own communities?
Well, this is a perfect example of a group that is doing just that. You're asking questions and you're having conversations about it, and you're trying to, bring some accountability to your small neck of the woods. And I think this is a great way to start. I'm a big one for, I love to read, and, so reading and asking questions and having these conversations and is I think a perfect place to start. I say a lot that inch by inch, life's a cinch, and yard by yard, life is hard, which is why I firmly believe in these tiny talks about sexuality. I think if you're going to try to transform your community, breaking it down into small, achievable goals is a really, really great way to start. And simply by, taking a topic that's of interest to you and deciding what you want to change about it and breaking that goal down into tiny steps and then taking those steps, And I have tons of different resources. So if you want resources, books and websites and, videos and all that stuff, just let me know.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer our questions. Now we want to open the floor up to our participants who may want to ask our guest speakers some questions. I know that we've been getting some questions on the way, so thanks so much for your participation in that aspect.
Cool. Yeah, ask me anything.
You can just unmute yourself and begin talking if you have a question, or you can put it in the chat as well.
Absolutely. Great question. So from what I can see, have you ever worked with legislators on getting more sex ed bills passed? I have not personally done this. And, definitely this is something that, this is an area that could use some support. I have chosen, because it's the thing that I like to do the best, is I've chosen to focus on, I do occasionally still teach middle schoolers sex ed, but I have found that sort of my sweet spot in teaching is I really like to teach seniors about sexuality. My oldest patient so far was a 105-year-old physician named Rose, and I thought she was awesome. And I really got a kick out of her and the questions she asked during the session that I taught. But the thing that I like to do the most is to teach parents how to talk to their, or caregivers, grandparents, aunties, uncles, older siblings, how to talk to kids of all ages about sexuality in an age appropriate way. So though I have not put my energy and time into legislative endeavors, it's definitely a worthwhile goal.
Okay, does anyone else have any last minute questions? Okay, if not, then we can wrap it up here.
So thank you everybody for attending the info session. If you want to learn more about the Sex Ed Initiative, you can visit us on Instagram at thesexed_initiative, or you can email us at thesexedinitiative@gmail.com.
And if you scan this QR code right here, you will be directed to our website where you can fill out a charter application form. It is very simple, and our team will get back to you as soon as possible, so we can walk you through the process of reforming your sex ed curriculum at school. So I'll leave this up for a moment if people are interested in sharing. The slides will also be shared on our website, as well as the recording of our meeting afterwards. So if you have any content that you want to go back to, it will be right there.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
Yeah, well, as a parent, I was I mean, the episode you shared with your 6-year-old son was very interesting. How do you decide a safe level of, how can I say, exposure to your kids?
Right. Well, guess what? He was already exposed. He read the word, right? And I don't think
You're
there
correct.
is any, right? So I don't think there is any topic. Well, I'm a sex educator, so I don't run from any topic. I look at it all as a teachable moment. But how am I going to teach a 6-year-old about orgasm, right? So I just used it as an opportunity to explain that, it can feel really good to touch some parts of your bodies, and there can be this intense feeling of good followed by an intense release or a relief kind of a feeling. Everybody is going to experience an orgasm differently, but I decided that that was how I would explain it to him. And of course, you know, it's iterative. You know, you teach your kids, you know, something, and then you say, you know, you can ask me more. And one of the things I say over and over to parents is, if you get it wrong, not wrong, but if you get it like you don't say it exactly how you want to, just ask for a do-over. My kids let me have do-overs all the time, you know, and it helps them to see, you know, I am human. And sometimes I don't get it just right the first time. So you can ask for a do-over, or you can say, hey, you know, I didn't have quite the words that I wanted when I explained this to you before, but now I found this really great video on amaze.org, which is also a fantastic resource for parents, because it has all of these age appropriate videos on tons and tons of topics related to sex ed. So, you know, I'll say, oh, I watched this really great video. I think we should watch it together. You know, so if you break it down into a tiny talk, so by answering the question, you communicate the most important thing to your kiddo, which is, you can ask me anything, right? And I will take your questions seriously, and I'll give you an answer to the best of my ability. But if you don't know what you want to say, it's okay to say, I don't know, give me a minute to think about that. And then come back to it. But don't just use it as an opportunity to run. Because I had a parent, my kiddos play hockey, and a hockey mom was sitting next to me in the stands and said to me, oh my gosh, let me tell you this funny story. She knew I was a sex educator and she thought I'd get a kick out of it. She said, the other night, my 11-year-old said to me, Mom, what's a dildo? And I said, look at the time. It's time for you to go to bed. And I put her to bed. Ha, 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 ha. And what happened there was she basically slammed the door in her kiddo's face and said, you can't ask me anything. There are certain things that it is not safe for you to ask. And there are certain things that you can ask me that I will absolutely ignore and not talk about. Right. And I'm not judging. I'm just saying that if you want the door to stay open, right, is that sometimes you have to take a deep breath and count to 10 and answer to the best of your ability, or say, I don't know, but let's find out together. Right. And one of the things you can use to buy time, which is a technique I teach parents all the time, is, what a great question. Tell me more about why you asked. And then you can find out, like, you know, did somebody on the playground call another kid a dildo? You don't know, right? Did your child just stumble across porn? You don't know, right? So I use it as not only a way to buy time, but to get a little bit more information. And if you can get that context, it helps you answer the question better. Did I hit on what
Yes,
was,
that was
important
really
there?
helpful. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
And so the short answer is, I think you can make any sex ed topic age appropriate. Life and the sexual soup in which we all swim, because there are sexual images and verbiage and stuff everywhere. The vast majority of 8 or 9-year-olds have accidentally stumbled across porn on the internet. That's true, right? By the time they're 8 or 9, most children have accidentally come across a pornographic image. Okay. So finding a way to, again, take a deep breath and say, wow, I'm guessing you have some questions about this, because, and this happened to my son. You know, it's just trying to find a way to have a shame-free conversation to say, hey, you know, you're certainly going to have questions about this, or you probably don't even know how to process this. Let me try to explain what you saw. Can be really helpful. But also really hard. And not just for me, you know, it's hard for everybody. And it's hard for different people in different ways.
Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, I'm so happy. Really, truly, ask me anything. I mean it.
Okay, so if no one has any further questions, thank you for attending our info session. We will be holding more events in the future as well, so please stay tuned for that.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll just say, Irene, here at the end, is there, if you